After a long day of work, it's time to slow down, breathe, and let your mind drift into a world of stories. Tonight, I'll share with you a gentle tale filled with warmth and imagination, something to ease the stress and remind you that the light still shines, even in the quietest moments. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps us bring more comfort and inspiration to you every evening. Now, relax, and let's begin. The lantern in the old oak, on the edge of a small American town, where porches creaked at dusk and fireflies stitched bright stitches. Into the dark stood an old oak that everyone simply called the oak. It was wider than any truck and older than any story told on summer nights. Its bark was deeply wrinkled, like the knuckles of a very old hand. Its roots ran under the road and under the schoolyard, and, if the legends were true, under the town's sleeping hearts. People said the oak had a hollow, and if you put your ear to it on a quiet night, you could hear the breath of the earth. People said a lot of things. Most folks were too busy to test them except for Daniel. Daniel had moved into the little blue house on Maple Street the winter after his dad died. He and his mum brought boxes that smelled like old books and cinnamon, and they tried to fill a new home with familiar things. But a house is not a home simply because you set a lamp in the window. It takes time, and sometimes it takes a little light. On an October evening that had the taste of wood smoke and apples, Daniel walked to the oak with a lantern. It was a small brass thing he had found at a yard sale for $3, its glass a bit fogged but still clear when polished. He hung it from a stick and carried it like a pioneer who had strayed off the wagon trail. He chose the oak because it felt like something that could listen. He had tried a notebook, but the notebook did not talk back. He had tried his room, but his room kept reflecting him. His worries grew larger in those four walls. He tried the oak. "Hi," he said, feeling silly. "It's me, Daniel," the leaves answered with a hush, a sound like 1,000 pages turning in a slow wind. "I don't need a miracle," he said carefully. "Just, I don't know, a sign that the light is still here, that it's not all dark now." The lantern flame lifted, as if someone had breathed on it, then steadied. The hollow in the trunk looked like a small doorway into a darker night. Daniel leaned nearer and held the lantern up, and the light slid over old scars, old knots, old stories etched in rings. "Please?" he asked. He did not expect an answer. He certainly did not expect the low, warm voice that rose from the hollow like a cello in a distant room. "You brought a lantern," the voice said. Daniel stumbled back and nearly dropped the stick. He looked around for a person, a speaker, a prankster live streaming him, anything that would make the moment ordinary. There was only the oak and the crickets and the lantern humming faintly with heat. Who are you?" he asked. "A listener," the voice said, "and sometimes a teller. I have been both for a very long time. You may call me Oak, as others do, or you may call me friend, if you stay long enough." Daniel licked his lips. "I'm not crazy, right?" "That depends on what your world thinks of talking trees," the oak said. "But here, under these stars, you are not crazy. You are simply brave enough to ask." Daniel held the lantern close to his chest. He noticed that his heart, which had been beating fast, was now steadying to match the slow rhythm of the leaves. "I asked for a sign," he said. "I got a conversation. And a good conversation," the oak said, "can be a sign." They were quiet together, letting night rearrange its furniture. A car passed, and the oak's shadow stretched and withdrew like something breathing. Daniel thought of how his father had breathed in hospital rooms where machines knitted light on screens. Light had felt cold there. Here, it felt warm. "People think light is just brightness," the oak said, as if reading his thought. "But light is also direction. It is the way a thing leans. Your lantern doesn't make the night disappear. It shows you where your next step, island. I need more than a step," Daniel said softly. "I need a way to live with this, to make a home where there is a hole." The oak creaked. Holes are strange. They can be endings that never finish, or they can be spaces into which something new can grow. The shape of a hole is a map to what was there, but it can also be a mold for what will be. "I'm not sure I understand." "You don't have to tonight," the oak said. "You only have to come back tomorrow." So he did. On the second night, he brought the lantern again, polished now so that his own face shone in it like the moon. He placed it at the base of the oak and sat with his back against the bark, which was rough but not unfriendly. "Tell me about your day," the oak said. "No one's asked me that in a while," Daniel admitted, surprised. "People say, 'How are you?' but they don't really want the long story." "I am old enough to want the long story," the oak said. "Begin anywhere." So Daniel told the tree about geometry class, which he did not love, and about a girl who wore green headphones and tapped her pencil to a rhythm only she could hear, and about the mistake he made at lunch when he asked how his friend's dad was doing before remembering that his friend's dad was deployed and not doing anything at home at all. "Sometimes," Daniel said, "I think my brain is a room with too many doors. The important one gets lost in all the other handles." "That is why you carry a lantern," the oak said. "Not to make the room smaller, to notice which door has a keyhole glowing." He thought about that. He thought of the small, half-funny, half-sharp guilt of getting things wrong. He thought of his mother, who came home tired from the diner, smelling like coffee and grilled onions, but still asked him about homework and rinsed apples for him with hands that never complained. He had been quiet in that kitchen. Not cruel, not ungrateful, just quiet. He felt the weight of quietness, a kind that was not rest, but absence. "I'll try to talk to her more," he said. "Trying is a kind of light," the oak said. "Come back tomorrow." On the third night, a storm gathered far off and laced the horizon with fragile white bones. Daniel felt the air like a breath held. He sat and the oak hummed and the lantern, bright as ever, held its ground against the draft. "Do you talk to other people?" Daniel asked. "Sometimes," the oak said, "but most hurry. They come to make wishes and run away before I can answer. Sometimes they are afraid that if the oak talks, it will say something they do not want to hear." What don't they want to hear? That they are braver than they believe, and that bravery requires doing something. Daniel thought about his father's tools, still in the garage, the hammer with the blue handle, the level that had a bubble like an eye. He thought about the half-built birdhouse they had planned to finish in spring, a spring that did not arrive for his father. He had avoided the garage because it made him feel perforated. He did not want to see his father's handwriting on the masking tape that labeled jars of screws. He did not want to decide whether to touch it. "Sometimes," Daniel said, "doing something is the scary part." "That is why the light moves," the oak said. "It does not drag you into the dark. It goes a step, then waits. You follow, and something inside you begins to trust. The next step will be lit too." Thunder sounded like a drawer closing in a giant's room. The lantern quivered, then steadied. Rain began like someone shaking rice onto a metal tray. The oak shivered and stretched its leaves to catch the first drops. "You will get wet," the oak warned. "I don't mind," Daniel said. "I'll tell you something true, if you tell me something true. A fair trade." I'm afraid of forgetting his voice, Daniel said. The oak did not answer right away. The rain found a rhythm, a soft counting. Voices do not vanish, the oak said at last. They sink into the grain. Wood remembers. So do we who live among wood. In time, you will hear him in new places, plates stacking, floors settling, your own laugh. It will startle you the first time. Then it will comfort you. Tell me something true, Daniel said. I am not only a tree, the oak said. I am also a door, and you are not only a boy, you are also a lantern. He returned many nights. The town watched him in small ways. Mrs. Keller on the corner porch watering her geraniums. Mr. Diaz at the hardware store when Daniel asked for sandpaper and varnish and small brass hooks. The librarian who slid a woodworking book across the desk without him asking. People notice more than they say. Sometimes their noticing is another kind of light. In the garage, cobwebs connected things that had once had nothing to do with each other. He tied an apron around himself and rolled up his sleeves. He touched the hammer. He said, "Dad," into the lemon-scented air where the old polish had faded but not disappeared. Then he set the board on the workbench and began to sand. At first, the work was clumsy. The sandpaper bit harder than he meant it to, and his arm ached. But wood is patient. It offered its surface again and again, and the board slowly gave up its splinters and became smooth. He measured twice and cut once, just as his father had taught him when the birdhouse had been only a sketch on scrap paper. He built a lantern shelf. It was small and square, with a lip so the brass base would not slide. He carved a simple line along the edge, a groove that caught light. He varnished it until it glowed like toast. He carried it to the oak. "Will you hold this?" he asked, feeling ridiculous and reverent at once. He pressed the shelf into a natural niche where a limb had broken long ago and healed into a cradle of wood. It fit as if the tree had been waiting for it. The oak said nothing for a time. When it spoke, its voice was low. "A boy brought a gift to an old friend," it said. "He did not simply ask to be comforted. He made a place for his light to live." The lantern on its shelf shone steadily. Raindrop or wind no longer a worry. Daniel hung the small blue-handled hammer next to it on one of the brass hooks he had installed. He laughed out loud. He had made a tiny shrine, but not the kind people kneel to. It was a shrine you could sit beside, a place where hands could rest and hearts could warm. "Thank you," the oak said. "You can say thank you?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Of course," the oak said. "Gratitude is the sap that keeps old things alive." Winter braided itself into town. Frost embroidered the sidewalks, and school mornings became a slow performance of coats and boots. The lantern's flame grew more precious. Sometimes Daniel did not light it. He would sit with the wick unlit and let the knowledge of its possibility keep him warm. Other nights, he lit it and watched his breath and flame argue quietly over which could be seen farther. One night, Daniel found someone already at the oak. It was the girl with the green headphones from geometry. Only tonight she wore a red hat with a pom-pom, and her headphones were hung around her neck like a small collar of music. "I didn't know anyone else came here," she said, scooting over on the root that made a perfect bench. "Me neither," he said. Sometimes I talk to it." "The tree?" He nodded. She nodded too. "Me too." They sat in comfortable embarrassment for a moment, then began to talk. Her name was Mira. She came because her brother had been sick but was getting better. And strange as it sounded, improvement had made her more anxious. "When someone is very sick," she said, "you get used to a certain kind of attention and fear. When they improve, the fear doesn't know where to go." "The oak says holes can become spaces," Daniel offered. "Does it?" she said. "The oak told me I could set down my backpack, not just carry it differently, that I could be a person, not a role. They started coming together sometimes, not always. They learned the etiquette of shared quiet. They made small rituals, leaving a note in a jar for someone who needed a kind word, replacing the candle in a mason jar on the opposite side of the trunk, sweeping leaves away from the roots after a storm, as if they were brushing hair from an old friend's eyes. Other townspeople began to wander by at dusk. A man who had lost his job and found his temper sat with the lantern one night and left with a plan to bake bread for the winter fair. A woman whose daughter had stopped speaking to her stopped at the oak and started writing letters she would send when it was time. A school custodian brought a thermos of cocoa and poured it into paper cups for anyone who came by. The oak did not ask for these things. Light asks by being itself. One Saturday, the town decided no one could say who started it, that they would decorate the oak for the holidays. Not with electric lights that would choke its branches, but with small handmade ornaments hung along the lower limbs, where the bark was thick and unbothered. Children cut stars from old maps. Teachers wrote good wishes on seed paper. The librarian wrote the first line of 100 stories on 100 small wooden tags and tied them with red thread. Daniel carved the word welcome into a wooden disc and sanded it until the letters felt like river stones. They stood in a loose circle at dusk, a little clumsy with their kindness. No one wanted to make a speech. The lantern burned steadily from its shelf. The old oak lifted and settled its limbs. Mira looked at Daniel and nodded. He cleared his throat. "I started coming here because I thought I needed a sign," he said, speaking to the people, speaking to the bark, speaking to the soft air that gathers when humans share the same hope. "What I found was a place to carry light together. My dad used to say that you can't save the whole world, but you can keep your corner of it warm. This," he gestured to the lantern, to the little shelf, to the ornaments that clicked gently against each other in the winter breeze, "is a corner." They sang one song, badly and sincerely, which is the best way to sing in winter. They lit several small candles. They promised each other nothing, which is sometimes the only way to promise everything. "We will show up when we can, and that will be enough." That night, as footsteps tapered away and the oak stood with its gifts, Daniel lingered. "Thank you," he said to the hollow. "And thank you," the oak said. "You have made me young, not in years, in usefulness. Will you stay with me?" Daniel asked, a little boy for a moment again. "As I grow up, I will remain," the oak said. "Trees are good at that, but you will carry me too. In your hands when you make things, in your voice when you make room for another voice, in your home when you welcome someone who is lonely. That is how light travels. It roots and it walks." Daniel reached up and touched the lantern's handle. Warmth came down into his fingers. He thought of all the ordinary nights ahead. Homework, dishes, cheap pizza, silly jokes, arguments and apologies, tiredness and second winds. He thought of the extraordinary nights folded inside them, like a secret letter. "Good night," he said. "Good night," said the oak. Shine. Years passed, as they always do, whether or not we are ready. People graduated and got new jobs, and returned and left again. The town got a new bakery that made croissants so good they made you forgive the sun for rising late in January. Mrs. Keller moved to be near her sister and sent postcards. The hardware store put out a dish of dog biscuits because a lab named Captain had decided the place was his route, and Daniel grew. He learned how to build more than shelves. He learned how to talk gently to his mother when she did not want to talk at all. He learned that grief does not end so much as it teaches you the grammar of absences, and that once you learn it, you can speak tenderly with other people in their own. He learned that leadership sometimes means arriving early to set chairs and staying late to stack them. He learned to carry a small flashlight in his backpack, not because he was afraid of the dark, but because there are always lost things in a school auditorium after a concert. He went to college, then came home again. We do not always stay away when the world calls. Sometimes we circle back to where our roots are. He became a teacher who told his students that extra credit existed, but so did ordinary credit, the kind you get for doing your best on a day when your best is smaller than last week's best. He walked his neighborhood in the evenings and fixed whatever small thing he could with the tools he carried. A loose hinge, a squeaky gate, a hinge that had stopped being a hinge because someone stopped believing it could be fixed. Each time, when he needed to remember why he did any of this, he went to the oak. The lantern was still there, polished by many hands now. The shelf's little groove still caught light like a smile. One evening, he found a note tucked into the mason jar on the opposite side of the trunk. It was in a round, childish hand. "Dear whoever finds this," it read. "My mom and dad are fighting. I hide in the bathroom sometimes and count tiles. If you are reading this, can you leave a note that will help me not be scared?" He took a breath. He had no magic answer, but he had a lantern, and he had learned that the smallest light is not a small thing. He wrote, "Dear tile counter, I once counted the metal studs on the underside of my desk when the world got too loud. I still count sometimes. You are not alone. When you can, breathe in for 4 and out for 6. Try putting your hand on your chest and feeling it move. This is your brave engine. It will carry you. If you want, come to the oak at dusk. Someone will sit with you a while. P.S. The best hot chocolate in town is at the bakery on Elm. Ask for extra marshmallows. Tell them the lantern sent you." He folded the note and left it in the jar, then sat down on the bench root and lit the lantern. People drifted past. Some stopped. One child, freckled and serious, stood and watched the flame with ceremony. "What's that?" the child asked. "A lantern," Daniel said. "What does it do?" "It helps you see the next step." "Does it make the monsters go away?" "Sometimes," Daniel said. "Sometimes it teaches you to walk past them." The child considered this as if weighing a coin. "I can do 1 step," they said. "I don't like 2 steps. 1 is enough," Daniel said. 1 is how all journeys happen. Night rose like a tide, and the lantern held steady, and the oak stood as it had always stood, and as it would long after Daniel was gone. But the light would not be gone then. The light would be in little shelves in other places, in small acts and ordinary words, in hands that have learned to make, in voices that have learned to listen, in a town where people had decided, without speeches, to be a corner of warmth. When the wind picked up and the leaves turned their pale undersides to the sky, the oak spoke. Whether Daniel heard it in his ear or in his heart did not matter. "The light still shines," the oak said, "not because the night yields, but because you carry it." And so, beneath the ancient oak, Daniel discovered that even the smallest lantern could keep hope alive, guiding him through the darkest nights. The light he carried was more than a flame. It was memory, courage, and love, meant to be shared. Now, as our journey continues, we leave the quiet forest and step into a little shop at the corner of town, filled with ticking clocks and hidden wonders. This is where our second story begins. The clockmaker's gift. On Maple and 3rd, where the sidewalks curved like smiles and the lampposts hummed faintly at dusk, there stood a shop no one quite remembered opening. It seemed to have been there longer than the mayor, longer than the grain elevator down by the tracks, maybe even longer than the town itself. Its sign, painted in gold on dark walnut, simply read, Harris and Timepieces. Inside, the air smelled of warm oil and dust, but also of something sweeter, vanilla maybe, or the last echo of cookies baked long ago. The walls were crowded with clocks, cuckoos with shy wooden birds, grandfather clocks tall as centuries, crystal mantle clocks that refracted light into tame rainbows. Pocket watches lay on velvet trays like secret moons. Time did not so much pass here as breathe. Behind the counter sat Mr. Harris, the clockmaker. He was a man in his 70s with steady hands and a listening posture like a musician waiting for his cue. He wore a spotless waistcoat with a ribbon watch tucked into the pocket and a small tool, part pick, part key, part wand he kept behind his ear, as if it might whisper directions. Children said Mr. Harris could fix more than clocks. They said if your dog ran away, you could bring its collar to his shop, and somehow the dog would come home. They said if you broke a promise, he could rewind it and give you another chance. Grown-ups laughed at the stories, but they slowed when passing the window, where a dozen clocks ticked in harmony though their hands pointed to different hours. Even their laughter contained a pause, the way a smile holds room for a memory. One October afternoon, the bell over the door chimed, and a girl named Lily walked in. She was 12, with tangled hair and eyes too serious for 12. She carried an old alarm clock, wrapped in a dish towel. "It doesn't work anymore," she said, laying it carefully on the counter. "It was my dad's. He gave it to me." Her voice snagged. "I thought maybe you could fix it." Mr. Harris turned the clock in his hands. The glass was cracked. One of the hands was bent as if it had tried to point and lost its nerve. He did not say impossible, or even difficult. He only set the clock on a square of leather, took the little tool from behind his ear, and tapped the case once, gently, as if asking permission. Instead of springs popping or screws rolling, a soft hum rose out of the brass. The glass smoothed. The hand straightened. The second hand began to move backward. The shop seemed to change temperature, like a room that remembers its fire. Lily smelled pancakes. She heard a laugh, her father's, low and warm. Sunlight ran across a kitchen table, and then her father was there, alive in a way that made her heart trip. Shirt sleeves rolled, flipping a pancake onto her plate as if he were tossing her a medal. "This one's for you, champ," he said, smiling. The kind of smiling people do when they feel most themselves. She reached. Her fingers went through light. The kitchen dissolved like breath on glass. She was back at the counter with the clock ticking normally, forward. "How did you?" she began. "A clock can hold more than minutes," said Mr. Harris, sliding a cloth over the polished face. "Sometimes what's broken isn't the time but the way the memory is kept. The past is not a place to live again, child. It's a lantern you carry forward." Lily pressed the clock to her chest as if it had a heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered, and when she left, she did something she hadn't done in months. She wanted to tell her mother everything she had seen. Word spread like snow, quiet, inevitable, softening the edges of things. A retired teacher came with her husband's pocket watch. A baker brought a metronome that had belonged to her grandmother who taught the town to waltz. A mechanic carried a dashboard clock from a car he rebuilt the summer he fell in love. Each person left with more than a repaired object. They left with the light in their eyes tuned to a steadier hour. Mr. Harris had rules. He never fixed time for greed. He never gave more than a glimpse. "Time is a river," he told anyone who fished for exceptions. "You may drink from it, but you cannot dam it." And if people asked where the visions came from, He would shrug the way a grandfather shrugs when a grandchild requests the 50th retelling of a story, happy to oblige, unwilling to explain the physics of love. In December, when the courthouse square was strung with lights and steam rose from cups in mittened hands, a boy named Jonah stormed in, slammed a scuffed wristwatch on the counter, and crossed his arms like a fortress. "It's junk," he said. "Doesn't work. Do whatever." Mr. Harris lifted the watch. Its face was scratched. The leather strap was split. The back was engraved, "Jonah first game." "This doesn't tell seconds," Harris said softly. "It tells courage." Jonah's laugh was more like a cough. "Right." The clockmaker tapped the case. For an instant, Jonah was back on a little league field. Small, knees buzzing with nerves, bat too heavy. His father in the stands, hand cupped to his mouth, shouting his name like a blessing. Strike, strike. Then wood met ball not far, not glorious, but enough. Enough to run, to laugh, to be surrounded at first base by teammates who smelled like grass and summer and hope. The shop returned. Jonah's fists had uncrooked. For the first time in months, his shoulders did not look like armor. "I forgot," he said. "Then remember," Mr. Harris said. "The boy who swung is still here." Jonah pushed the watch into his pocket and left without another word. But in January, his teachers noticed he'd stopped arguing. By March, he had joined the team again. That spring, his father stood in the bleachers, quieter now, but still there. The bell chimed. The river of time took new drinkers. A woman named Mrs. Byrne arrived on a windy Thursday with a silver locket watch. She wore a coat too thin for the season and a stubborn smile. The kind of smile you shore up like a wall against private weather. "It belonged to my mother," she said, placing it down with care. "She used to dance with me in the kitchen. I can't hear the song anymore." Mr. Harris tapped the hinge. The locket opened to a music no human ear had invented, and yet everyone knows. The rhythm of a kitchen, evening, pot lids, wooden spoons, footfalls. Mrs. Byrne saw her mother's bare feet sliding on linoleum, hips swaying, hands flour-dusted, eyes amused because the radio was playing a waltz and they were doing a sort of kitchen foxtrot. Mrs. Byrne felt her own small feet atop her mother's. She felt the lift and the turn and the safe circle, the oven's heat, the windows dark, the ordinary day brightened by a dance that made it a holiday. When it ended, she was crying. Not sorrow like a storm, something else. Something like rain after a long dry spell. "Thank you," she said, voice rough with relief. "I thought the song was gone." "It wasn't gone," Mr. Harris said. "It was waiting for you to listen at the right speed." A veteran named Cole came in with a metal field watch scratched to matte. He stood a long time, not looking around, as if the room might surprise him. He finally put the watch on the counter and stepped back as if it might explode. "I don't want to see anything," he said. "I just want it to stop ticking at night." Mr. Harris nodded. "We can do quiet," he said, and tapped the watch in a way that produced no vision. Instead, the second hand softened, its click settling into the larger heartbeat of the shop. The face seemed to exhale. "Not everything needs a picture," Harris said, handing it back. "Sometimes the gift is silence. Sometimes the gift is a clock that learns to breathe with you." Cole took it, swallowed, and nodded once. A nod that contained 1,000 words, and the decision not to say them. A boy named Arlo, 8 and stubbornly proud, brought a kitchen timer in the shape of a tomato. "My grandpa taught me spaghetti with this," he said, chin high as a dare. "He's gone now. Mom says timers are timers, and that's that." "And what do you say?" Mr. Harris asked. Arlo scuffed his sneaker. I say he said wait for the second ring because the first ring is too excited and the noodles aren't ready yet. Mr. Harris smiled and tapped the tomato. For just a breath of time, the shop smelled like steam and basil, and the peculiar joy of water moving from boil to bubble to calm. A voice not loud, a Midwestern tenor with gravel at the edges said, "Second ring, kiddo. Let the sauce learn patience. It tastes different when it's waited for you." Arlo's lip quivered and then steadied itself. "Okay," he said, like a soldier. He tucked the timer under his arm as if it were fragile and invincible at once. A painter named Ruth came with a small carriage clock and a bigger fear. "I stopped painting 5 years ago," she confessed. The colors got loud. The canvas kept saying no. "I want to try again, but I'm afraid of what happens if I do. In my experience, Mr. Harris said. Afraid and ready, wear the same coat." He tapped the clock. Ruth stood in a white room, light falling through a high window like mercy. Her old teacher leaned over a canvas. He wasn't speaking. He didn't need to. The silence was instruction. Mix, swipe, risk, wipe, try again. Ruth watched her own hands lift a brush and make a mark that wasn't right, and then, miraculously, wasn't wrong, it was beginning. When the room shifted back into the shop, Ruth was shaking, then laughing. "I remember," she said, pressing her fingers to her mouth. "It wasn't that I didn't know how. I forgot that it's allowed to be ugly first." "Most good things are," Harris said. A mother named Tamsin arrived with a cheap digital alarm clock. "My daughter and I don't talk," she said. "We exchange calendars. I thought if you rewound us." She stopped, embarrassment flushing her from throat to hairline. "That's foolish. Foolishness is how miracles get a ride," said Mr. Harris, and his tap did not show her a golden summer morning. Instead, it showed a small, messy Tuesday. Tamsin sat in a parked car outside a grocery store, crying over a broken jar of spaghetti sauce, trying to calculate if she had the $8 to replace it. Her daughter, Little, then put a hand on her shoulder and said, "It's okay, Mummy. Let's have butter noodles." The sentence hadn't cured anything. It had made it bearable. Back in the shop, Tamsin was already nodding. "Butter noodles," she said to herself. Later that night, she would sit on the edge of her daughter's bed and ask if she wanted to split a bowl and watch the dumb cooking show they'd used to mock together. It would not fix everything. It would fix something. Winter moved over the town like a careful hand pulling up a blanket. The clocks in the shop ticked deeper, their sounds rounder as if insulated by snow. Sometimes, late at night, people walking home from choir practice or the diner would swear they heard a chime from Harris and Timepieces, not a single bell but a chord, the sound of time agreeing with itself. And then, one fresh morning in March, the shop did not open. The sign still swung, but the door was locked. The window was clean. The clocks inside, visible through the glass, ticked without hurry. Lily, older now, a college student home for spring break, was the first to wonder aloud if he was okay. She knocked. She tried the handle again. To her surprise, it gave. "Mr. Harris?" she called, stepping in on a rush of familiar scent. No answer. On the counter lay his waistcoat, folded like a letter, the ribbon watch looped over it. Beside them, a small, sealed envelope addressed to whomever keeps the time. Lily opened it with the grave authority of the person who is there first. "Time has been kind to me," the note read in his careful hand. "It has also been exact. I am going where even clocks can only guess. The gift was never mine alone. I merely remembered how to hand it back to you. The hours you relived were not a doorway to return through, they were lanterns to carry forward. Keep them lit. Repair what you can, let what you cannot rest, and when in doubt, choose the second ring. People gathered. Tamsin from the grocery, Cole from the VFW hall, Ruth with a rosemary plant tied in twine, Jonah, taller, older, with the edges rubbed off his voice. Arlo, now a lanky middle schooler, holding the tomato timer like a relic. The shop filled not with panic, but with a hush that felt like respect. "What do we do?" Lily asked, looking not just at the note, but at all the clocks with their mouths open in 1,000 O's of time. "Keep the hours," said the librarian, who had come because librarians always do. "He's told us how." And so the town did something towns are better at than they think. They shared a job. The baker swept the floors and brought scones shaped like gears. The high school woodshop built a stool with a seat that spun, not because it needed to, but because it was fun. Cole repaired the hinge on the back door and changed the batteries in the smoke detector and said nothing about the way his hands shook for the first 5 minutes and then didn't. Ruth hung a small sign under the gold-lettered one. It said Memory Hours. She turned her painter's smock inside out and tied it on as if it were an apron. She did not know how to wind a Viennese regulator, but she knew how to keep a room's light soft enough that people spoke the truth. They discovered that the shop did not need magic in the way people think of magic. It needed attention. It needed someone to listen as if listening were a craft. The clocks, for their part, did what clocks have always done. They witnessed, one by one, people returned not just for repairs, but for what happened while repairs happened. A boy named Micah, the kind of kid who reads everything and trips over his own feet in hallways, brought a small hourglass. "It used to help me calm down," he said. "I flipped it and watched the sand, and it helped. Now it doesn't help." He didn't need a vision. He needed permission to sit at a counter for 15 minutes while someone didn't mind his silence. Ruth turned the hourglass, and they watched it together. Micah cried loudly and inelegantly, then laughed about how loud he had been. And that, it turned out, was the new way the hourglass helped. A man named Eddie, big-hearted and clumsy with apologies, brought an old oven timer from his mother's kitchen. It had a dent from the time he'd been playing basketball indoors, and the ball had gotten more ambitious than he was. He kept turning the timer to 10 minutes and saying, "I'll call her after this," and then not calling for 10 years. In the shop, he turned it again and sat while it ticked, and when it rang, he borrowed the shop phone and left a message that began, "Mom, it's your idiot," and ended with tears and laughter and the promise of Sunday lunch. The town did not leave the clocks untouched. They were wound, dusted, repaired, learned. Arlo, older, now learned how to set a pendulum so it did not quarrel with gravity. Jonah counted off beats for a classroom of third graders until they clapped a rhythm like rain on a tin roof. Tamsin started a Wednesday night hour called Second Ring, where anyone could come sit and drink bad coffee and say, "I'm not okay," and be told, "That's okay," and mean it. Lily found Mr. Harris's little tool behind a loose board, like a treasure hidden for a child on a birthday. It fit her hand, as if hands had a shape that included objects they had not yet held. She tapped a jar lid, a toy clock, the ribbon watch. Sometimes there were glimpses. Often there were not. The shop's gift had never been a parlor trick. It was the practice of mending, of asking a world that breaks things by nature to also make them useful again. On the first anniversary of the day, the door opened without Mr. Harris behind it. The town held an evening they called Keeping the Time. They set the clocks to the same hour, not to trap time, but to share it. The bakery brought butter noodles, because some rituals must be kept precisely. The VFW brought coffee you could use to revive a tractor. The librarian brought a stack of notebooks. People spoke. Not speeches the opposite of speeches. Little stories that added up. Mrs. Byrne, hair now streaked more with silver than dye, stood and said, "I still dance in my kitchen. My knees complain. I tell them it's a waltz, not a sprint." Cole placed his field watch on the counter and said, "I sleep," and the whole room applauded as if he'd won a race because he had. Ruth, paint under her nails, brought in a small canvas of the shop window at dusk. In it, clocks glowed like lanterns hung at different heights inside a quiet ship. She had signed it not with her name, but with a tiny etched H in the corner of the glass. Arlo set the tomato timer on the counter and said, "Turns out the second ring is great for more than noodles. It's perfect for apologies." He demonstrated. Turn, tick, breathe, ring, call your brother. Eddie introduced his mother, who wore pearls and a grin that said she'd forgiven him before he was even born. Micah brought a bigger hourglass and gifted it to the shop. "For people who need longer," he said, and the room laughed, a gentle laugh that means me too. They lit a candle, not a scented thing, a plain beeswax taper, slow and honest. Lily set it beside the ribbon watch and read Mr. Harris's note aloud. And when she came to choose the second ring, everyone echoed it, a chorus that made the glass sing. After the gathering, people drifted out into a night that smelled like thaw and change. Lily stayed to blow out the candle and wind the clocks for morning. She was the last in the shop, and for a moment, standing in the center with dozens of ticks traveling toward her like footsteps, she thought she could hear a voice, a familiar one, kind and amused. "You've kept the hours," it seemed to say, not in her ear exactly, but in the place where memory and trust shake hands. "Good. Now keep going." She smiled, because she had been ready to cry and needed permission to do the other thing. "I will," she said softly to the air, to the wood, to the brass. "We all will." She locked the door and turned the sign to closed, a word that had grown to mean something gentler in this town. Will open again. Years do not stop, even for people who treat them kindly. Babies were born, parents got older, some people left, and when they returned, they stood in the shop doorway blinking at what had changed and what had not. The clocks stayed stubbornly themselves, honest, mechanical, mortal, miraculous. They needed winding, they needed dusting, they needed new springs and occasional mercy. So did everyone else. In the second spring, after Mr. Harris left, a storm tore down Maple and Third, elbowing trees and slapping shingles like playing cards. The power went out. The courthouse clock went dark. People lit candles and sat on couches, telling the kind of stories storms draw out. Your grandfather's barn, the time lightning found your tree, the way your mother laughed when the pie burned and called it rustic. The next morning, the shop door flew open on a gust of post-storm light. A little girl, 6 maybe, hair braided like a fence, marched to the counter and set down a plastic wristwatch with a cartoon rabbit on it. "It's broken," she said, proud as if she had discovered a new planet. "Can you fix it?" "We can look," said Lily, who had learned the right sentence for almost everything. The little girl swung her legs off a stool and watched. The rabbit watch was silly, not built to last. The back was snapped, the battery dented. Lily could have replaced it. She could have said, "We don't work on toys." Instead, she reached for the small tool and tapped the plastic with the same attention she gave to a 100-year-old French regulator. For a split second, the girl looked like a baby on a beach, delighted by foam. A man her father lifted her under the arms and spun her once, high enough to frighten and thrill, then set her down and kissed the top of her head so quickly the girl barely noticed she had been loved, in a way that would keep its shape for years. Back in the shop, the little girl giggled. "That was me," she announced, as if no other explanation were possible. "So it was," Lily said, and replaced the battery with one from the jar labeled "Yes." "Do I owe money?" the girl said, scopingly adult. "Not today," Lily said, "but you do owe the world kindness. Pay in full when you can." The girl nodded solemnly. "Okay," she said. At the door, she turned and added, "I like your clocks. They make me feel like I'm not running out." Lily put a hand to her chest, not because it hurt, but because it had expanded. "Me too," she said, when the door had closed and the hum of the lamppost came in to keep the shop company. On the following Sunday, the town dedicated the courthouse clock anew. It had survived the storm but lost its nerve. Cole and Jonah and a handful of patient souls took it apart and put it together on a tarp as if it were a ship they had built to sail above Main Street. When they hoisted the face back into place and the hands began to move, the square broke into applause you could hear in kitchens blocks away. Some said the clock struck 13 that first hour, a joke from the universe. Others said they had simply miscounted because joy is terrible at math. That evening, the shop held its hours as usual. A man who had not cried since middle school cried. A woman who had cried for years laughed until she had to sit down. A teenager tried to explain to his mother that the panic he felt was not rudeness. And the mother tried to explain to her son that fear had made her bossy. And between them, trying got them over a small river that would have taken years to ford alone. The clocks ticked, not together, exactly, together enough. Lily was closing when she found something under the counter drawer, a scrap of paper, folded and folded again, the paper gone soft at the creases. She opened it carefully. The writing was tiny, crowded to fit. It was not Mr. Harris's hand. It was a list of names and times. Mrs. Byrne 3:10 dance. Cole silence. Arlo second ring. Ruth allowed to be ugly first. There were dozens more. It was a ledger of gifts, given and received, of minutes when people had been more than their schedules. On the back, in a clumsy scrawl that made her smile before she even read it, someone, maybe a teenager, maybe the child inside a grown-up, had written, "Time belongs to us now." She taped the scrap inside the cabinet door, where the extra candles lived. When she closed the door, the paper disappeared from sight. That felt correct. Not secret, exactly kept. Sometimes the holiest things are the ones you put away carefully so you can take them out again. Before she left, she went around the room and touched the side of each clock, not to hurry it, just to greet it the way you greet a dog you love. She checked the hourglass Micah had donated and turned it so that anyone who needed longer would have longer. At the tomato timer she paused, thumb resting on the dial, and smiled because she could hear in her head the voice that had become the town's unofficial instruction. Choose the second ring. She locked the door. The sign flipped to closed. The window glass reflected the street, Maple and 3rd, evening walking itself home. Outside, the lampposts hummed. In a dozen kitchens, timers ticked toward dinners. In a handful of bedrooms, little clocks glowed soft green on nightstands. In somebody's pocket, a wristwatch warmed to body temperature and kept courage. Back in the dark shop, after the last footstep faded, the clocks did what they had always done. They kept time. They kept watch. And if you pressed your ear against the door and listened hard, you might have sworn you heard a low voice, amused and kind, say what it had said from the beginning. The true gift is not the hour you relive, but the love you carry forward. And if you waited for it, patient as pasture, faithful as an oak, kind as a town, you might hear the words that had become Maple and Third's own benediction. Choose the second ring,